At the Grand Hotel, the finest restaurant in town, the dishes weren't the only things getting served that night. Some patrons were about to get a taste of their own prejudice, and it wouldn't be so sweet. The chandelier above cast a warm, golden glow over the polished mahogany floors of the Grand Hotel, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Patrons whispered behind menus embossed with gold leaf, their laughter mingling with the soft clinking of crystal glasses. Amidst this opulence stood Marcus Hale, his tailored navy suit hugging his frame like it had been stitched for royalty. His presence commanded attention, not just because of his height or the quiet confidence in his stride, but because he carried himself with an air of ownership. Yet, as Marcus adjusted his cufflinks near the entrance, a white couple brushed past him without so much as a glance, handing him their keys with an offhand, "Park this carefully." He froze for a fraction of a second, then offered them a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't the first time someone had mistaken him for staff. It likely wouldn't be the last. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something simmered beneath his composed exterior, a storm waiting to break. The couple who had tossed Marcus their keys were Richard and Cynthia Langston, a well-to-do pair whose polished appearances masked their deep-seated prejudices. They weren't alone. Joining them were two of their friends, Greg Whitaker, a loudmouthed businessman with a penchant for making inappropriate jokes, and his wife, Patricia, who clutched her designer purse as though it might ward off any perceived threat. As they approached the entrance, Richard turned to his group and sneered, "Looks like they've upgraded the help here. Still can't believe they let his kind work places like this." Cynthia tittered nervously but said nothing, her lips curling into a faint smirk. Greg chimed in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Yeah, probably just some guy from the wrong side of town trying to make a buck. But he doesn't even know what valet means." Marcus overheard every word, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. He stepped forward, holding out the keys with exaggerated politeness. "Your car will be safe, sir," he said smoothly, his tone betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. Greg snorted. "You better not scratch it, buddy. That Ferrari costs more than your yearly rent." The group laughed, oblivious to the weight of Marcus's gaze as he watched them walk away. For a moment, he considered correcting them, but no, he thought. Let them dig their own graves. Inside the restaurant, Marcus lingered near the entrance, observing the group as they were greeted by a hostess. Richard gestured impatiently, demanding a table away from the kitchen noise, while Greg loudly complained about the lack of attention from the staff. "Honestly, service is slipping these days," he muttered, shooting a glance toward Marcus, who stood calmly nearby. "Probably because they hire anyone these days." Unbeknownst to them, several waitstaff had already noticed the exchange outside and were exchanging uneasy looks. One server, Elena, approached Marcus discreetly. "Mr. Hale, do you want me to handle this?" she whispered, her tone laced with concern. Marcus raised a hand slightly, silencing her without words. His expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Amusement? Anger? She couldn't tell. Meanwhile, Patricia leaned closer to Cynthia, her voice low but sharp enough for Marcus to catch. "I don't care how fancy this place is. If they're letting his kind work here, I'm not sure I trust the food." Cynthia nodded absently, sipping her champagne flute as though agreeing with the sentiment. The tension escalated when Greg flagged down a passing waiter, not Elena, and barked, "Hey you, tell your valet buddy out there to hurry up with our car. We might need to leave early if this place doesn't shape up." The waiter hesitated, glancing at Marcus before replying, "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Greg interrupted, scoffing. "No, what's misunderstood is why we're paying top dollar for amateurs." Marcus finally stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying an edge that silenced the room momentarily. The group stared at him, startled by his sudden proximity. Before they could respond, a senior manager appeared, addressing Marcus respectfully. "Everything all right, Mr. Hale?" The Langstons and Whitakers froze, their smug expressions faltering. For the first time, doubt crept into their faces, but it was too late. Marcus simply smiled. Oh, everything's fine for now. The mention of Mr. Hale hung in the air like a thunderclap, and the group exchanged uneasy glances. Richard was the first to recover, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle even to his own ears. Oh, come on, he said, waving a dismissive hand. You're not actually. Actually what, Mr. Langston? Marcus interrupted, his voice smooth but laced with quiet authority. He took a step closer, his piercing gaze locking onto Richard's. The owner? Yes, I am. Cynthia's champagne flute hovered midway to her lips, her hand trembling slightly. Greg opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, clearly unsure how to salvage the situation. Patricia gripped her purse tighter, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Before they could fully process the revelation, Marcus added casually, "Funny thing about assumptions, they often say more about the person making them than the one receiving them." His tone was measured, almost conversational, but the weight of his words hit hard. The senior manager lingered nearby, watching silently as the group squirmed under Marcus's stare. For a fleeting moment, Greg tried to laugh it off. Well, no harm done, right? Just a little mix-up. But Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the manager. Please ensure their reservation is noted, and bring me when dessert arrives. It wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The group was seated at a table near the center of the dining room, far enough from the kitchen to satisfy Richard's earlier demand, but close enough to draw attention. Their unease grew palpable as they tried, and failed to act natural. Cynthia fidgeted with her napkin, smoothing it over her lap repeatedly, while Greg kept glancing around the restaurant as if searching for an escape route. Patricia whispered something to her husband, her voice trembling. Do you think he's going to do something? Greg shot her a glare, his bravado slipping. Of course not. He's just trying to make us uncomfortable. That's all. But his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. Meanwhile, Marcus moved through the restaurant with deliberate grace, stopping occasionally to greet other patrons or exchange pleasantries with staff. To anyone else, he appeared composed and professional, but those who knew him well could see the subtle tension in his posture. Elena hovered nearby, clearly torn between concern and anticipation. When she approached him briefly, Marcus gave her a small nod. Let them stew, he murmured under his breath. They've earned it. Back at the table, Richard attempted to regain control of the situation by loudly criticizing the menu. Honestly, these prices are outrageous, he declared, tapping the leather-bound booklet with unnecessary force. And why isn't anyone coming to take our order? His voice carried across the otherwise serene dining room, drawing curious looks from neighboring tables. A young server finally arrived, visibly nervous as she greeted them. Good evening. May I assist you? Yes, finally. Greg snapped, cutting her off. We've been waiting forever. What kind of service is this? The server hesitated, glancing toward Marcus, who stood observing from a distance. Sensing her discomfort, Marcus stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding silence. Is there a problem here? He asked smoothly, addressing the server rather than the group. She shook her head quickly. No, sir. Just taking their order. Marcus turned his gaze to the group, his smile razor-sharp. Ah, excellent. And how are we enjoying the Grand Hotel so far? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, it's fine, I suppose, though the service leaves something to be desired. His attempt at bravado fell flat, especially when Marcus raised an eyebrow. Interesting, Marcus replied, his tone deceptively light. Because according to my records, your party has only been seated for 3 minutes. Perhaps expectations need recalibrating. The group shifted uncomfortably, their earlier arrogance crumbling under Marcus's calm, yet pointed remarks. Cynthia tried to interject, her voice wavering. We didn't mean anything earlier, Mr. Hale. It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Marcus repeated slowly, letting the word linger. He leaned slightly against the back of an adjacent chair, his demeanor casual but commanding. Funny how misunderstandings tend to reveal truths people would rather keep hidden. Before they could respond, another server arrived with a bottle of wine, a vintage so rare it cost more than their entire meal. Marcus gestured for the server to pour a glass for each of them. "Compliment to the house," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Enjoy. We'll revisit this conversation shortly." As he walked away, the group exchanged panicked glances. They had no idea what was coming next, but whatever it was, they knew they deserved it. The group sat in tense silence, the weight of Marcus's earlier words pressing down on them like a storm cloud. The rare wine before them went untouched, its presence mocking their unease. Richard fidgeted with his tie, loosening it as though he couldn't breathe. Cynthia stared at her glass, her fingers tracing its stem absently. Greg leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence, but his darting eyes betrayed his nerves. Patricia clutched her purse like a lifeline, her lips pressed into a thin line. Marcus reappeared moments later, this time accompanied by the senior manager and another staff member carrying a tray of desserts. The aroma of chocolate ganache and caramelized sugar wafted through the air, momentarily distracting nearby patrons. Marcus gestured for the server to place the tray on the table, then turned to address the group directly. "I promised you dessert," Marcus began, his tone conversational but laced with an edge that silenced any attempt at interruption. "But first, let me clarify something. This restaurant, my restaurant, is built on principles of excellence, respect, and inclusivity. It's why we've earned accolades from critics and loyal customers alike. Yet tonight, I witnessed behavior that contradicts everything the Grand Hotel stands for." Greg scoffed weakly, attempting to deflect. "Look, Mr. Hale, I think there's been some miscommunication here. We didn't mean anything by—" "Didn't mean anything?" Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through Greg's feeble protest like a knife. His calm demeanor cracked slightly, revealing the simmering anger beneath. "You handed me your car keys without so much as a glance, assuming I was a valet because of the color of my skin. You insulted my staff, questioned the quality of my establishment, and made derogatory remarks about my kind. Do you really expect me to believe that none of that was intentional?" The group flinched visibly, their faces flushed with shame, or perhaps indignation. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. "Let me finish. What fascinates me most isn't just your prejudice. It's how comfortable you are displaying it. How entitled you feel to judge others based on appearances while remaining blind to your own ignorance." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Now, here's what will happen next. These desserts," he gestured to the tray, "are comped. Consider them parting gifts. Because after tonight, you won't be welcome here again. Ever." Cynthia gasped audibly, her hands flying to her mouth. "You can't ban us. We're paying customers." Marcus smiled coldly. "And I'm the owner. My rules. Besides, I wouldn't want your negativity tarnishing the experience for other guests." He turned to the senior manager. "Please ensure their check is expedited and notify security to escort them out if necessary." As Marcus stepped away, leaving the group stunned and humiliated, whispers rippled through the dining room. Other patrons had begun to notice the confrontation, their expressions ranging from sympathy for Marcus to disdain for the group. Elena approached him discreetly, her voice low. "That was incredible, Mr. Hale. They deserved every bit of it." Marcus exhaled slowly, his composure returning. "Thank you, Elena. But remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about setting boundaries and reminding people that respect is non-negotiable." The room seemed to hold its breath as the senior manager returned with the group's check, placing it on the table with a firmness that echoed Marcus's earlier resolve. Richard snatched it up, his face reddening as he scanned the total, which included not only their meal, but also an additional service fee that left him sputtering. "This is outrageous," he exclaimed, slamming the leather folder onto the table. "You can't charge us extra." Marcus, who had been observing from a discreet distance, stepped forward once more. His presence alone was enough to silence Richard mid-protest. "Consider that fee compensation for the discomfort your behavior caused my staff and myself," Marcus said coolly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Or would you prefer I file a formal complaint with the board regarding discriminatory conduct in my establishment? Greg leaned forward, his bravado flickering back to life despite the circumstances. You're bluffing. No one's going to take your side over ours. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Are you willing to test that theory? Because trust me, Mr. Whitaker, I have witnesses, staff, patrons, even security footage that paints a very clear picture of what transpired tonight. He gestured subtly toward the cameras mounted discreetly around the dining room. Wouldn't want this little incident splashed across social media, would we? The group exchanged panicked glances, their earlier arrogance crumbling into desperation. Patricia whispered urgently to Cynthia, "Just pay it and let's go." But Greg wasn't ready to concede defeat. "Fine," he spat, pulling out his wallet with exaggerated frustration. "We'll pay. But mark my words, this isn't over." "Oh, I assure you," Marcus replied, his smile razor-sharp, "it absolutely is. As of this moment, you are persona non grata at the Grand Hotel. Attempt to return, and security will handle the matter accordingly." With trembling hands, Greg handed over his credit card, avoiding eye contact with both Marcus and the server processing the payment. The transaction felt interminable, each second stretching the tension further. When it was finally completed, the group rose hastily, eager to escape the judgmental gazes of other diners. As they made their way toward the exit, Marcus called after them, his voice carrying just enough to ensure everyone heard. "Safe travels home. And remember, assumptions can be costly." The final blow came when they reached the valet stand, only to discover that their car keys were nowhere to be found. A young attendant informed them apologetically, "I'm sorry, sir, but your vehicle appears to still be parked where you left it earlier, outside the restaurant." The implication hung heavy in the air. Marcus had never bothered moving it. Humiliated and defeated, the group trudged off into the night, their expensive clothes and polished shoes offering no shield against the weight of their disgrace. Inside, the dining room buzzed with quiet murmurs of approval. Patrons nodded respectfully as Marcus passed by, some offering subtle smiles of solidarity. Even the staff seemed buoyed by the outcome, their usual professionalism tinged with quiet triumph. Marcus paused near the entrance, watching the group disappear into the darkness. For a brief moment, satisfaction flickered across his features, but it was fleeting. This victory, while satisfying, wouldn't erase the deeper issues at play. Still, tonight, justice had been served. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the space once more. Yet, the energy had shifted. There was a palpable sense of vindication in the air. Staff members exchanged knowing glances, their earlier unease replaced by quiet pride. Elena approached Marcus again, this time with a small smile. "That was something else, Mr. Hale. They won't forget that anytime soon." Marcus nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Neither will we," he said quietly, his gaze drifting toward the door where the group had exited. "But it's not about them. It's about standing up for what's right, for ourselves, for each other." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of several patrons who offered approving nods or subtle smiles. The message was clear. His actions resonated beyond just one confrontation. As the evening wound down, Marcus retreated to his office, a sleek space adorned with awards and framed photographs celebrating the Grand Hotel as success. Sitting behind his desk, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. While the incident with the Langstons and Whitakers was resolved, it underscored a harsh reality he faced all too often: the persistent biases and prejudices that lurked beneath society's polished veneer. Elena knocked gently before entering, carrying a cup of tea she knew he favored after stressful evenings. "Thought you could use this," she said softly, placing it on his desk. "You handled that beautifully, sir." "Thank you, Elena," Marcus replied, offering her a genuine smile. "But let's not kid ourselves. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. No one should feel entitled to treat another person that way." She hesitated, then added, "Still, what you did tonight matters. People saw it. They'll remember it." Maybe it'll make some of them think twice next time. Marcus took a sip of the tea, its warmth grounding him. I hope so, he said thoughtfully. But change doesn't happen overnight. All we can do is keep setting examples and holding people accountable when they cross the line. Back in the dining room, the staff gathered briefly before closing up for the night. The senior manager addressed the team, acknowledging Marcus's leadership and thanking everyone for maintaining professionalism during the tense encounter. Tonight reminded me why I'm proud to work here, he concluded, earning murmurs of agreement from the group. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded within the restaurant's walls. But inside, there was a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that even in moments of injustice, dignity and resolve could prevail. As the last patrons departed and the staff finished closing up, Marcus stood alone by the restaurant's grand windows, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars, a reminder of the world beyond these walls, a world still riddled with inequality, but also capable of moments of justice, however small. Tonight had been one such moment. He thought about the Langstons and Whitakers, their faces flushed with humiliation as they left. While part of him felt satisfaction in having exposed their prejudice, another part recognized that this victory was bittersweet. It didn't erase the sting of their words or the countless similar encounters faced by others every day. But it did affirm something important. Standing firm against ignorance could inspire change, even if only incrementally. Elena poked her head into the dining room one last time before leaving. Heading out, Mr. Hale, she said warmly. See you tomorrow? Marcus turned, offering her a grateful smile. Bright and early. Thank you for everything tonight, Elena. After she left, he took a final walk through the restaurant, ensuring everything was in order. As he passed the table where the group had sat, he paused, his fingers brushing lightly over the edge. For all their venom, they had inadvertently given him an opportunity to demonstrate grace under pressure, to lead by example, and to remind those around him that respect was non-negotiable. Back in his office, Marcus switched off the light, plunging the space into darkness save for the faint glow of the city outside. He exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the evening lift slightly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new guests, and perhaps new lessons. But tonight, he allowed himself a quiet moment of triumph. As he locked the door behind him and stepped into the cool night air, Marcus straightened his suit jacket and walked toward his car, parked neatly near the entrance. The valet station nearby offered a polite nod. Good night, Mr. Hale. Good night, Marcus replied, returning the gesture with a small smile. Driving home, he reflected on the evening, not with anger, but with resolve. Prejudice might persist, but so too would his commitment to challenging it. And in that balance, he found hope. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone tried to push you around or take advantage of you? We would love to hear your stories and how you handled it. Share your experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed this and want more content on inspiring Black Stories channel like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, the brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear.